Thank you all, and good evening. I am Michelle Kidwell Gilbert, Chair of the Archaeology Committee of the National Arts Club. For those in the audience who are not familiar with the club, founded in 1898, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Gramercy Park with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions. You can see one around this room. Downstairs, there's the Roundtable exhibition, and 3 of our committee members, Lynn, Brian, who are here, and Irene, who I don't see right now, are in the exhibition itself. Lectures, readings, theatrical, and musical performances. For more information about the Arts Club, kindly visit us at nationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And that's one of the things that as a chair I'm supposed to say. What I want to also say, and I'm very proud of, the National Arts Club was the first club in New York City to admit women equally with men. And I think that's terrific also. On behalf of the President, Board of Governors, and the Archaeology Committee, I am particularly delighted that our committee member, Professor Patricia Eichenbaum Karetzky, in the first row here, will be offering the penultimate lecture of the current series entitled The Discovery of Desecrated Chinese Buddhist Art. I will leave it to Patricia to discuss how one determines whether desecration is brought about by worshipers, anti-worshipers, or a product of natural decay. What I wish to focus upon is Buddhism. The 1560s BCE, during which Buddha was born, was an extraordinary decade. And I'm going to give you some of the events that took place. 567, during Egypt's 26th dynasty, Pharaoh Amos II repels an invasion instigated by the former Pharaoh Apis, assisted by Babylonian troops. 566, the first known Panathenaic Games of ancient Greece are held in Athens. Certainly, we celebrate the games to this day in France, as they are. 564, the death of Aesop, the Greek inventor of fables, was born on the island of Samos. 562, the death of Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of the Babylonian Empire, who captured Jerusalem and brought the kingdom of Judea to an untimely end by forcibly banishing most of its population. 561 BCE, all 8 planets of the solar system, as well as the dwarf planet Pluto, fall into planetary alignment. And a couple of years ago, I could have said 9 planets, but now we know it's 8 plus a dwarf. But the most significant event for us this evening occurred in April 563, with the birth in Nepal of the Hindu prince. He renounced his royal heritage to wander for 6 years. In India, at the age of 35, after leading a life of asceticism and meditation, he attained nirvana, or full enlightenment, also translated as passing away, and became known as the Buddha, or the awakened one. Most scholars agree upon his dying in 483 BCE at the age of 80. According to Buddhist philosophical traditions, the Buddha taught a middle way between sensual indulgence and severe asceticism, leading to freedom from ignorance, cravings, suffering through rebirth. His core teachings involve a training of the mind that includes ethics and kindness towards others, as well as virtuous practices such as sense restraint, mindfulness, proper meditation, leading to the good life by describing how all mental states and concrete things come into being and cease to be. The Buddha's birthday is a joyous holiday for believers and time for reflection. Celebration varies among the different types of Buddhists. Additionally, the exact date of Buddha's birthday correlates with diverse Asian calendars. It is primarily commemorated in April or May or in June when a leap year. But this varies because of the Western Gregorian calendar. Based on Sri Lankan conventions, I was invited by His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Palitha T.B. Kahona to a May 24th, 2013 Vesca celebration hosted by his nation at the United Nations. Some of you present this evening will recall his brilliant International Archaeology Day presentation, where amongst the discussion of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Sri Lanka, he discussed the Temple of the Sacred Tooth, one of the most venerated Buddhist temples in his nation, located within the premises of the Royal Palace Complex of Kandy. Yesterday, I sent this portion of my introduction to the ambassador, who, following his service at the United Nations, became the Sri Lankan ambassador to China. He immediately replied, "Dear Michelle, this is a valuable topic to explore. I have been to a number of magnificent sites in China containing Buddhist art. Most are well-maintained and patronized. Pity that I will miss this talk. And for all of you whose friends have missed this talk, know that around 3-4 weeks, it will be put upon the club's YouTube channel so they can join and learn from Patricia, as I know we all will this evening." Cheers, Palitha. Now, included were 2 photographs. And I have to tell you, I didn't know what the photographs were of. I spent around a half hour last night Googling Sri Lankan and Chinese Buddhist sites to no avail. It didn't come up, but Patricia told me the first one is in Tibet. Okay, so isn't that glorious? Yeah, that's really something. And here is the second one, which he sent me. So they're really quite beautiful. I wish I knew a full identification to share with you, but I don't have that. But I'd like to tell you about our eminent speaker. Receiving her bachelor's degree from New York University, master's from Hunter College, and doctorate from the Institute of Fine Arts of New York University, Professor Karetzky has been, since 1988, the Oscar Malstenberg Chair of Asian Art at Bard College, and beginning 6 years later, an adjunct professor at Lehman College of the City College of New York. Editor for 5 years of the Journal of Chinese Religions, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. She has published numerous books and articles on medieval Chinese religious art and on Buddhism, curated exhibitions related to analogous themes, as well as written an essay entitled Journeys of a Jug for the compendium when the American School of Classical Studies at Athens received the club's Medal of Honor. In it, Patricia analyzes similarities between Hellenic and Chinese forms and how one culture inspired the other. Kindly join with the Archaeology Committee in welcoming our esteemed member, Patricia Eichenbaum Karetzky.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so pleased to see so many people. I thought only my children were coming. And Michelle, thank you. Michelle is the most gracious, kind, compassionate woman, and she runs this department and all of these lectures so assiduously. She's really terrific. Tonight I'm going to talk about, can you hear me? Am I loud enough? Higher, louder, okay. Tonight I'm going to talk about an excavation in northern China from around the 6th century. And what's interesting about it is these were Buddhist objects found in the thousands. that were damaged and then buried. It turns out that there are several sites in this area, about 4 altogether, which show the same sort of desecration of Buddhist icons. So first I'm going to introduce my talk, then we'll look at the excavation and a few representative examples. Then we'll consider a problem in iconography, which I hope you find interesting. And then finally, we'll come to some conclusions about the way in which they were buried and why. Oh my gosh. I suppose it's fully charged, but okay. Today I will discuss the extraordinarily large cache of Buddhist scriptures dating from the 5th to 6th century found in 2012 in Yecheng City, Linzang County, Hebei Province. The discovery is an important part of the contribution to the extant evidence of medieval Buddhist art in North China. Studies on the religions of China rely largely on texts, but this kind of material evidence is also a primary source of information. Bearing dates and inscriptions, the sculptures help to establish a chronological development of style, iconography, and religious practices. Looking at the Yecheng finds also evinces Buddhism's role in the history of this region of North China. Although we often discuss Buddhism as a monolith, an in-depth look at this group of sculptures makes evident the multifaceted and complex nature of Buddhist practice, which is conditioned by local history and traditions, craftsmanship, patronage, and materials. Analyzing the iconography, epigraphy, and styles of art reveals how local monks, donors, artisans, and religious teachers had an impact on artistic production, resulting in unique characteristics at the various sites. In addition, Buddhism in the northern region was dependent on the influence of both foreign and resident monks and the scriptures and images they possessed, so it was very local. Comparisons with contemporary Buddhist sites in that region reveal similarities as well as differences, and shows us how these various factors shape the art. According to the inscriptions, monks proved to be a dominant role in commissioning the works. What is more, the manner of the burial of the sculptures raises several intriguing questions. Why were thousands of damaged images interred at about the same time in the same vicinity? Similar icons were mysteriously laid to rest at the Shuda Pagoda in Chuyang, Hebei, and in Qingzhou in Shandong, and another cache was found in nearby Changsha in Shanxi, and we'll look at these at the end. All of these locations were within the political control of the Northern Wei, Eastern Wei, and Northern Qi, that is, roughly the 6th century. Was this how local monastics responded to a regional historical crisis of anti-Buddhist attacks? Buddhism was born in an area near the Ganges in northeastern India. Its basic tenets, based on the insights Prince Siddhartha, are encapsulated in the 4 truths. All life is suffering. Suffering is the result of attachment. To achieve release, one must destroy attachment. And to accomplish that, there was a meditative and moral code of behavior called the Eightfold Path. Buddhism developed over the centuries into an ascetic way of life, but by the time of the first millennium, when nomadic peoples occupied northern India, it became a religion, offering a pantheon of beings to aid in salvation and the belief in a paradise of everlasting life. This is quite contrary to native Indian traditions. Such ideas and their art traveled along the Silk Roads to northern China. In the 5th century, northern nomadic peoples occupying North China enthusiastically espoused Buddhism, but there were periods of resistance to the foreign religion. By the time of the 6th century, when our sculptures were made, China was divided into a northern and southern kingdom, and with Yecheng as its northern capital, and it was during this tumultuous era that the sculptures of Bei Wu Zhang were created and subsequently buried. Historical records, The discovery of foundation of a pagoda and of a jade relic casket established the area as a Buddhist center. And now we'll look at the finds. The Institute of Archaeology of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences reported that finds at Hebei Province. The Buddha figures were buried in a distinct location, showing that the damage to the icons was organized, systematic, and on a large scale, providing archaeologists with evidence to study the widespread destruction enacted during anti-Buddhist prescriptions in the medieval era, and the practice of burying desecrated images. All of the works were buried in a disorderly fashion, and most of them were broken, yet the finds were rich, beautifully executed, and vary in size from 20 centimeters to life size. Traces of their original color and gold leaf are still visible. Many of the sculptures have elaborate back screens or mandalas. There are icons of the historic Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of the Western Paradise, the Buddha of the Future, and the Buddha of Compassion. Bodhisattvas, supernatural helpers, dressed as Indian princes, are also included, and they are devoted to the salvation of mankind. Only a fraction of the cache of sculptures are on display at the Yecheng Museum, and a few are housed in the Hebei Provincial Museum, and these are not published. Looking at the images from Yecheng presents a diversity of formats: sculptures in the round or high bas-relief, standing or seated figures, single figures or those with 2 to 6 flanking attendants. In general, the more numerous the attendants, the later the date of the carving. The icons may be seated in the lotus position or with crossed ankles and in princely ease with one leg bent, one leg pendant. The hands are usually in the fear not position of the right palm facing out and charity, the left hand hanging down, pendant palm facing forward. And now I'm going to show you a very brief progression of styles. They start out very Western, they become Chinese, and then with influences from the Silk Road, they become Westernized again. At Yecheng, Northern Way sculptures are few, and such early icons are clearly based on Western Indian prototypes. For example, there is the blue stone Shakyamuni image measuring 31 centimeters tall, identified by an inscription dated 495 on the left. And the inscription reads, Liu Bo Yang, a resident of Ye County, Wei Prefecture, respectfully makes the stone statue of Shakyamuni Buddha. The statue is typical of the early era and closely resembles the Colossus, the big one on the right, in the imperially sponsored Cave 20 at Yungang Datung, Shanxi of the later 5th century. As always, the Buddha has a number of distinctive features, including a tall bump on the top of his head, a wart between his eyes, long earlobes resulting from his early princely life of wearing earrings, a monastic garment of 3 untailored cloths, gilt skin, which is worn off here, a halo, and a mandala. Here at Yungang and Yecheng, the monastic cloths wind around the body, leaving the right arm and shoulder exposed. The body is well articulated in Western style. Similar too is the tall cranial protrusion with engraved swirl designs. Both are also seated with crossed legs, their hands in meditation gesture, folded palms facing up in their lap. Portraits of donors in native Tuoba dress, these are the invaders of northern China, of tunic, trousers, boots, and tall caps, accompanied by their names, appear on the base of the sculpture and on the rear face. They make offerings of incense or flowers to the Buddha. In time, the Western appearance of this Buddha transforms into a more Chinese one, in line with the political and cultural program of Sinicization by the rulers of the Northern Way. Prime examples include the Standing Buddha triad sponsored by Zhang in the 3rd year of Yongping, that is 510, measuring 37 centimeters tall, and the seated image. The garment now no longer resembles monastic garb, but a royal, long-sleeved, and belted Chinese gown with a cascade of voluminous peaks. This style of robe was in concert with the Northern Way's adoption of Chinese-style formal dress in court starting in 486, as part of their appropriation of Chinese culture. In addition, the monk Tan Yao, the controller of monks, identified the Buddha with the emperor Wencheng Di, which is implicit in the Buddha's garment being treated as an imperial robe. In deference to Confucian objections, the garment now totally covers the body, which disappears under the weight of the drapery. The slender physique is also more Chinese. Dense, linear designs define the garment, halo, and mandala, replacing the earlier sculptural definition of the body. One of the iconographical developments evident in the late Eastern way, 535 to 550, is the presentation of multiple characters. The richly carved relief dedicated by the monk Daozi in 546 has a centrally seated Shakyamuni flanked by 2 monks, 2 bodhisattvas, and 2 guardians. Above their head, angels descend, and on the base are 2 renderings of fearsome lions with thick manes, and the dedication reads, "In the 4th year of Wu Ding era, Great Eastern Way, Daozi, a monk, invites craftsmen from the capital to respectfully make the stone image of Shakyamuni." And the last era that we'll look at, the Northern Qi, 550 to 577. Under the Northern Qi, sculptures are much more sophisticated. They have bodies that are more 3-dimensional, and the drapery, reduced to a few simple folds, adheres like wet cloth, revealing the body beneath and exposing the right shoulder. These works tend to present numerous attendants, as we've seen: bodhisattvas, monks, and guardians. Angels descend from the sky, and lions appear on the base. They are more naturalistic portrayals. As an accommodation to the Confucian ethic of filial piety and the high value given to writing, these later ones often have inscriptions that are longer and credit the merit garnered from having the icon made to a loved one. More popular than ever are the images of salvific characters and their promise of an afterlife in paradise. The pensive prince, a local favorite, which we'll look at in detail in a moment, sometimes appears painted on the rear face of the stele. The new style is obvious in the damaged stele of the Buddha seated under the Bodhi tree. His body is slim and elegant, and yet has real physicality, the garment clinging to his body. There is a neat top knot on his head. Now the Buddha sits on a tall hourglass-shaped base resembling the cosmic Mount Sumeru, and the lotus bases of the attendants are linked together as joined stems of a single plant. Although damaged, the stone retains 2 coiling dragons on either side of the Buddha. On the base, lions flank an incense burner, which is distinctive for the 2 little figures that hold it up. And now we'll look at an iconographic theme unique to this area, which is Siddhartha as a pensive prince. A prevalent theme at Yecheng shows Siddhartha as the Buddha is named prior to his enlightenment, having his first meditation, presaging his later enlightenment. He is sent by his father to oversee the plowing of the fields. Watching the animals toil, he has his first meditation, which becomes the first of the 4 truths: all life is suffering. Precedents for the pensive prince posture are found in 2nd century India. The event is narrated in the 2nd century Chinese text of the life of the Buddha that was translated into Chinese, the Shu Xing Ben Qi Jing. And I quote, "The young prince watched these creatures devour each other, and his merciful heart was deeply wounded. As he sat under the tree, he attained the first degree of meditation. The sun's rays were strong and bright, and the tree under which he sat crooked its branches to provide shade for his body." Unquote. This episode adorns many of the Yecheng stele. One dated to 544 is inscribed, "In the 2nd year of Wu Ding era, He Pisha and Li Huixiang, disciples of the Buddha, make this statue of a meditating prince." Unquote. Siddhartha sits on a low base in a princely posture. His right leg is bent, and the ankles rest on his left knee. He supports his head in his right hand, a gesture of thinking. He wears a skirt, scarves, and a low crown, and he sits on a stool made of grass because he's seated outside. 2 monks stand on either side of him. Above them is a pair of ascendant angels. Their legs rise behind them. Filling the space of the mandala is an engraved lozenge design reminiscent of a schematic rendering of mountains, suggesting the outdoor setting. At top is a small character seated on a lotus base, his hands in greeting. On the base are two lions shown in profile, flanking a central lotus bud-shaped incense burner. A beautiful but damaged stele with remnants of gilt and painting has not been identified by inscription, but it can be attributed to the Northern Qi era based on style. Two monks flank the prince, and fragments of standing bodhisattvas remain next to them, forming a pentad. In the tree above are small souls in lotus pods, flying angels, and at the apex of the tree is a pagoda. The prevalence of the theme of the meditating prince during the Northern Dynasty's period has attracted a lot of interest among scholars. No less than 3 dissertations have been written on the subject, which resulted in various readings. I have found the frequency of the depictions at the capital of Yecheng is clearly related to the precious miracle-working sculpture which Alexander so profound mentioned in a history of the monks, the Shu Gao Sung Juan, written by Dao Xuan in 645 AD, and I quote, it's a long description. Wu Zhang Ying went upstream to the west, still hunting vainly for an image. He was resting briefly in a wood when he caught sight of a Brahmin monk going along, carrying a statue. The man said that he was going to Suzhou to present it to Wu Zhang Ying to be worshipped. Ying said, "Those must surely be the words of the Buddha, for I am that distinctive person myself." The image was turned over to him, and he took it back to the capital. There, an imperial order was issued to copy it. 10 statues in all were ordered, each with writing under the foot. New and old were impossible to tell apart. But when Ying was directed to pick his original, the image came down to him in a vision and said, "This is the true form," just in time for him to return and get the right one. He went back to Suzhou, where divine omens thereafter occurred frequently. Emperor Shao Wendi of the Northern Wei invited it into his palace city. The last ruler of the Northern Qi sent an emissary to bring it back to the capital at Yecheng. After the fall of that dynasty, during the Zhou persecutions, it was buried for safekeeping by the monks. With the restoration of the faith under the Great Sui, happy times came back again, and so it is now at Tazi Si at Yeshen in Shangzhou. It is interesting that this story not only expresses the prevalence of the image at Yecheng, it also asserts that there were 10 copies among the many more that must have been made. This explains the replication of the image. Furthermore, the possession of this miracle-working icon conferred a special status on the ruler as deserving of it, and it was also a prized possession that brought good luck. The anecdote also affirms the practice of both burying sacred icons for their protection during destructive eras and their retrieval in happier times. This may have been the case with the cache from Yecheng, which was first buried after the 577 prescription, only to be uninterred in the Sui dynasty. At a later time, they were reburied together, perhaps as a result of a subsequent prescription in the mid-9th century. And now I'll give you a comparative view of some of the other regional finds in the area. There are 3 contemporary regional Buddhist finds that parallel the Yecheng collection. Geographically, the nearest is the group of 2,000 white marble icons discovered in 1954 at the Shuda Pagoda in Chuyang County, Hebei Province. The find was accidentally discovered by a local in 1953 who found some Buddhist statues at the site of the Sung Dynasty Shuda Temple in Chuyang. Subsequent excavations unearthed 2,000 fragments during 1953 and 1954. 247 pieces, which are mainly broken, bear inscriptions, ranging in date from 520 to 618. Most are housed in the Beijing Palace Museum, Hebei Provincial Museum, and a museum at the site right near the pagoda, which was built in 1019. It's not clear when or why the images were buried. Comparing these to their counterparts in Yecheng, there's a remarkable correspondence in themes and comparable stylistic progression. For example, there's a nearly matching later Northern Way steeling of a seated Shakyamuni dated 528 that relates closely to the one from Yecheng dated 505. Both share a slender, elongated body and head, tall top knot, and full kimono-style drapery that covers the body and spills over their crossed legs. The Yecheng statue's inscription by the monk Tanjing, and others in 528 credits the benefits of the offering to their teacher, parents, and all living creatures. Our second excavation, dating to the period, is located somewhat farther away in Jingzhou, Shandong, but similarities abound. They too are crafted in white marble and decorated with polychrome and gold paint, and correspond in the stylistic and iconographical development in the region. Beginning in 1971, several discoveries in temples in the area were made. Those from Lungxing yielded 250 heads and 200 fragmentary bodies. Archaeologists determined finding deliberately smashed and decapitated icons. Many of the heads were missing from the 200 or so torsos. However, the cache was buried in pits and arrayed in order, and several bear evidence of repeated repair. One example of a standing bodhisattva demonstrates the similarities. The general configuration of the bodies of the bodhisattvas, their stance, and even the faces are analogous, although the details of the jewels are different. There were only 3 pensive prince images found here. Perhaps their importance was greater nearer the capital, as the historical account suggests. The presence of artifacts and coins dated to 1200 and 1250 led the local experts to place the time of the burial of the statues in the 13th century, when Buddhism once again flourished in the region. Interpretations of the circumstances abound. Li Fengjun, author of the archaeological report, cites a memorial inscription dated 1004, recording how traveling monks saw more than 300 broken Buddha images at a temple not far from Lungxing. They organized local clergy, a monk from the temple, and authorities to respectfully bury the fragments and construct a reliquary pagoda above the cache. A third site, less well known, is Nanishui in Jinqian, Shanxi. In 1957, there was a find of nearly 2,100 pieces of Buddhist sculpture that date from the Northern Way to the Northern Sung, which are now housed in the Hebei Province Museum and a museum constructed at the site. Most of them are stacks of square blocks carved on all 4 sides and piled one on top of each other. They were randomly placed, and there's no indication of what the original arrangement was. But for a few inscriptions dated to the 6th century, little is known about the trove of stones. Because of their occasional clumsiness and inconsistent iconography, they have been deemed folk art by the local experts. A few are excellently carved and may have been done by itinerant artists on their way to the nearby capital. As Chen Li Gui, who studied the collection, noted, there were 33 examples of the pensive prince figure from the mid to late 6th century. And there are also motifs that are shaped. Looking at these 4 discoveries makes clear that regional culture determined the production of Buddhist art during the northern dynasties. The sites are contemporary, under the same dynastic control, and not too far distant from one another. To an impressive degree, they share artistic and iconographic styles. For example, in Yecheng, nearby Shuda, and Nanishui, the presence of a miracle-working icon of the pensive prince revered by the imperial rulers, was repeatedly reproduced. The last question to be considered is the manner of the burial of these religious statues. The Northern Zhou's virulent anti-Buddhist attacks of 577 is the most often cited and most probable cause of the destruction of the images at Yecheng and Qingzhou, where the targeted decapitation of the images seems intentional. In contrast, the stones at Nanishui and Shuda do not seem to have suffered intentional desecration. It's clear that the Buddhist icons, either desecrated or abandoned, were buried and reburied. 3 of the finds give evidence of the interment, unearthing, and reburial, which accords with the political religious conditions of the time, as described in the Chinese text. They may have been buried to protect them at Nanishui or after they were desecrated at Yecheng and Qingzhou. Both Yecheng and Qingzhou have icons from later date, the Sui and Tang dynasties. And at Shuda, the collection included artifacts from the 13th century. So it's not entirely clear. In any case, Buddhist icons, the target of anti-Buddhist government policies, were later revered and protected over the centuries. They were determined important enough to be buried, perhaps several times, and with these recent discoveries, they are again brought to life. Thank you.
That was absolutely fascinating. I want to thank you for it, Patricia.
Pleasure, thank you.
And I have so many questions. First of all, if you look at the middle image, now we're seeing a tree. It's like a framing element over the prince.
As the scripture describes, he sat under the tree, and
It's
the tree
wonderful.
moved to protect him as he was meditating.
I think this is absolutely wonderful. It's very different than some of the other images that you showed. I'm going to ask you a personal question, but before I do, when you're talking about desecrated objects and Buddha, and one of the early ones was a large image in a cave.
Yes.
What it reminded me, and it was part of one of our programs on the Desecrated treasures from Afghanistan, were the large images of Buddha that were desecrated a few years ago.
By the Taliban.
By the Taliban. Yeah. And, unfortunately, this is going on now as in the past. Really.
I think they got everything in Afghanistan.
Second, do you want to speak?
I think the Taliban got I think the Taliban got everything. I don't think there's anything left for them to destroy.
And you know what was so horrible? We had this one.
It's not working.
Oh, it's not working. Can I? Danny? He's my expert on such matters. Okay.
Oh, it's muted. There we go.
Did I do something?
No, it was good.
Okay. We had a program with Jane Hickman, who has spoken here 3 times. She's with the Penn Museum and an archaeologist. The last talk was on Minoan jewelry. But before that, she spoke about a hoard of gold objects from Afghanistan and how this brave curator stood up to the Taliban and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And the pieces at that point were in the museum. I hate to think of what's happened to him. And the objects, as you said, the Taliban probably got everything. And it's one of the reasons why it's very important to trace ownership of objects. And we have some of the UN regulations from 1970. And I look at some of these, have they been subject to looting? Are there some you think that are missing? Or has everything been unearthed and remains in museums, collections?
There's one story about the site of Dunhuang up in the Gobi Desert, and they found 2 men who were cutting some of the sculptures out. They hung them on the spot.
What? They hung them on the spot. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, they hung them on the spot. But in China, there's always thievery. In any great big country, it happens.
Yeah. So I have a personal question to you, and I only ask it of committee people who give lectures. How did you get involved in Chinese art, archaeology? What was the genesis for you personally?
I was an undergraduate, and I took a course in Chinese art, and I fell in love with it, and I went on to graduate school. So.
Well, it speaks about the importance of the humanities, certainly, that we all believe in here. And I will tell you that the new president of the National Arts Club comes from education at NYU. So I think that's a good synergy that's going to be happening. Do we have other questions from the audience? Yes, Arlene?
This Buddhism wasn't really a main religion in China because they had this Confucius and they kind of, and some Taoism, and they kind of like mixed them up.
Let me begin first
Don't
and
know
then
how
you'll
they
speak.
managed that. Maybe it's something to do with this destruction because maybe they thought Confucius wouldn't agree with this. I don't really know. But they did this to a number of dynasties.
Okay.
Mix of all these different things.
If I heard you correctly, Arlene, you felt that Buddhism was not a major religion in China. There are many other religions there. I want to tell you all that today.
Would that cause this destruction? I don't know.
Well, okay.
Conflict.
Yeah. Today I went to the Metropolitan and I spent an hour and a half, 2 hours in their Asian wing. And you see the objects that go cross different countries. And it's repetition and they're extraordinarily beautiful. There were a few with painting, and that's why I was very interested in the one that you showed us, where we could see the colors. Is what Arlene said, that Buddhism was not the major, or was it at a certain time period?
There was a resistance to Buddhism because it was considered a foreign religion, and there were several periods of prohibitions and destruction of the temples and the images and delaicizing the monks. Taoism, a very, very ancient religious tradition. It has many aspects to it. One of it is religious. There's a religious church, there's temples, there's rituals and prayers. And Confucianism is a way of thought, but it was treated like a religion, and there were temples for that. In the Sung dynasty around the 11th century, there came up this sort of syncretic attitude that they were all talking about the same thing, and they shared similarities. But Buddhism penetrated the popular level, and today is still very popular. And Taoism as well is still popular. And the communist government is bringing back Confucianism because it's such a strong ethical code to try to impose on the people. So they all still sort of thriving. Yes?
Yes.
I'm not art anthropologist, but I just looking at the images with the lions at the bottom.
Yes, yes.
And it feels like similar to what you see in Assyrian art. And I'm wondering
Absolutely.
if it's influenced from the Silk Road kind of in that development.
Do you want to repeat the question?
She was asking about the lions that appear always on the base of the sculptures and noting that those were important in Assyria. There's an extraordinary amount of mixing of themes. And Buddha is called the lion voice as one of his attributes. Mm-hmm. And I think the sculptures tried to indicate this by using the lion base, which was also a symbol of royalty and a throne, and certainly came from Persia. So, yeah. In fact, that's where the idea of paradise came from. In India, they don't care about paradise, but during this crazy period, it absorbed that, and that's what became the Buddhist religion as opposed to ascetic practice. Yes?
What do the angels represent? And I mean, they're in the Old Testament, the New Testament. What do they represent in Buddhism?
So that's also an excellent question. And this is, again, this sort of mixed bag of images that come together in North India around the turn of the millennium. They're Greek. They're Greek images, and they go back to the Hebrew Bible as well, the seraphim. And they represent heaven, as they always do.
May I just for a
Sorry.
second? Yes. You have Alexander the Great going into India, and the art form that comes out is Gandhara art. There is a speaker I'm considering for next year on India. So you can ask your question again then, should we have the program. But it's wonderful when you have this mixing of cultures, really, throughout. Now, I think you were raising your hand?
Yeah, I'm a little curious about the timing of this and when the Buddhist principles were translated into Chinese, when that got started, and I understand then with this Pure Land tradition. How does that tie in with this chronology that you're talking about here?
So this period in India, around the first millennium, India was invaded by nomadic people, and they had no allegiance to foreign ideas. They were happily excited about Roman ideas and Persian ideas, and so at this time, Buddhism adopted Persian ideas. The halo comes from, and the angels, and so many things like that. And certainly the land of paradise, whereas everlasting and everlasting light, everlasting life. And this was foreign to India, but it became part of the package that was brought to the Silk Road. Indians have no regard for written records. They don't write them down because of the idea of an infinite number of rebirths. They believe that you come back many, many, many times, forever, incarnations, karma. They really weren't. Yeah, but that's different. I'm just saying that the Pali Canon was written in Sri Lanka, was not written in India. So the Pali Canon is the oldest extant canon, and it was translated, and the scriptures were translated in China as early as the 2nd century. If you go to Columbia University, there's a wall of 10,000 scriptures translated by the Chinese, because there was never codified. It wasn't like the Bible, and they said, okay, we're finished. This is the gospel, this is Apocrypha. It just kept going. Every monk would come with his scripture, and he would have it translated. So it's not the Pali. Pali was closed, but the Chinese tradition is infinite.
2nd century.
The earliest one is the 2nd century. AD. Sorry, AD.
So it's just 300 years before.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
Buddha,
And they continue to be translated.
yes, there's a question there.
Hi?
I saw a hand go up. Are there other questions? Okay, may I now speak for a minute? I want to thank you, it was fascinating. Get your guests, please do. We want you safe. It was wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much, Patricia. It was absolutely splendid, and I think I learned a lot, and I think quite a few of you in the audience did as well. This is the final lecture in the current series, and what a series it has been. We began this year on September 11th. During my introduction, I discussed how anti-Muslim sentiment led me to found the Archaeology Committee as a way of bringing people together by understanding their shared humanity. Something analogous should certainly transpire after all the irrational, abounding anti-Semitism with those ignorant of history, and that, for example, the very word Israel was included in the Meneptah Stele, dated approximately 1200 BCE. Further on Egypt, programs revolved around King Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, and Napoleon's invasion, which led to the discipline of Egyptology. Our exploration of Hellenic cultures related to 3 events: International Archaeology Day, focusing upon Cyprus; the Greek city Notion in Anatolia, where the great painter Apelles was born; and the club's Medal of Honor, gloriously bestowed upon the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. And I mentioned how Patricia contributed a fascinating essay to the compendium or little book that we had published. Bridging these civilizations was a discussion of early language and what the Tower of Babel signified. Continuing with our annual talk devoted to America, we learned more about early New York history. tonight's lecture, focusing on China's intriguing past, can be viewed as an antidote to such politicizing phrases as the Chinese virus. Yes, archaeology deeply matters, for from this fascinating discipline, we learn to respect others by comprehending diverse civilizations. May the eternal pursuit of truth and knowledge forever be at the forefront. And I was glad when someone referred to the importance of the humanities for learning, when Patricia was answering how she became involved in Chinese art. With deep appreciation to our entire committee, and especially Assistant Chair Lynn Mayacole, and assistance whenever needed from Courtney Brown and Arlene Schutz. Do enjoy the punch reception which follows, and it's right past those curtains. So I thank you, and we look forward to next series.